thought I'd share here. On with our material for today. So, chapter 11, the inheritance of God's Son. And David has volunteered to be our reader today. Thank you, David.
Never forget that the sonship is your salvation, for the sonship is yourself. As God's creation, it is yours, and belonging to you, it is his. Yourself does not need salvation, but your mind needs to learn what salvation is. You are not saved from anything, but you are saved for glory. Glory is your inheritance, given you by your Creator that you might extend it. Yet, if you hate part of yourself, all your understanding is lost, because you are looking on what God created as yourself without love. And since what he created is part of him, you are denying him his place in his own altar.
So this first paragraph really sets us up for the rest of the material, and it's important that we pause here and kind of orient ourselves to what's about to happen with the reading. This is deeply psychological. And so we know and have affirmed many times that our true self, our true being, does not need to be saved because it was created perfectly and it remains in perfect light forever, our true self. But our self concept, the story we tell ourselves, is another matter. And so, as it affirms here, your mind needs to learn what salvation is. So your true self doesn't need salvation, but your mind needs to learn what it is. And here comes the counter narrative of the ego. If you hate part of yourself, all your understanding is lost. The ego is an attack on your true self, your light, your glory. The ego hates that concept of self and wants to convince your mind to abide by its narrative of self-hatred. As a result, you will look on yourself and everything else that God created without love. This is not necessarily a pleasant realization, but a necessary one, because we have to identify that there is a counter narrative functioning that would oppose the love of creation, which includes the love of ourselves and all other selves. And so we will explore that in more detail throughout this reading today. So a couple hands. Heather?
Yeah, that last paragraph just jumped out because to me, that's the essence of the ego backlash. That's where that comes from for me. You know, if I start stepping into my grandeur, then boom, you know, and so it just was like, wow, what a wake up call that is. That's so perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Charlie. Kim?
Ditto what Heather just said. And then I have a question, and I think I know what your answer is going to be, because all week I've heard you say, Kim, it's mind training. So here's the question. Why is that so easy to forget?
Yeah, well, it is mind training. You can put it under that. I was trying to think of a more helpful, perhaps. So I think it is, the mind will forget until we train the mind to remain purposeful, to remain focused on task, and to remember who we are. So there's a whole phenomena in the course talk about remembering our true self versus forgetting. And just to say, Kim, it's everyone deals with this. This is the ego wants you to forget the truth so that you can blindly wander into its own narrative. Sandra?
I find that this was my gateway to freedom, because I did get a counter narrative given by my caretakers, which I believed, and they were lies about me. And this is so beautiful that the glory is your inheritance given you by your creator, not by my mom and dad, but by my creator, by God herself, that she may extend it. So I define myself the way God defines me. And it just brings me so much joy and so much glory. I don't have to do a thing, nothing more than I've already done. You know, all I have to do is kind of move into this space of how magnificent I am, you are, we all are. And that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be stuff coming up. And that's where this willingness to be in the unknown without fear, as far as relationship with others, because it can get pretty scary sometimes with relationship with others. But knowing, just holding on to God's definition of who I am really just sets me right up for a beautiful day. I'm complete.
Thank you. Susie?
Yeah, just to follow up with Kim, I just call it like an undoing of a thought system. You know, I have to train my mind. Yeah, so because I saw you thinking. So for me, it's undoing of a thought system that I had for decades. So I don't forget as much as I used to, but it was a habit almost. So like, I know we talk about this a lot. It was just a habit. It's just like, and you know, until I became aware of it, then it became a willingness to just do my lessons over and over and over again, and just keep going. And when I forgot, choose again. That's all. So yeah, that's just what came up for me. That's all.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go on.
Could you try to make God homeless and know that you are at home? Can the Son deny the Father without believing that the Father has denied him? God's laws hold only for your protection, and they never hold in vain. What you experience when you deny your Father is still for your protection. Wait, what you experience when you deny your Father is still for your protection. For the power, I'm misreading this somehow. What you experience when you deny your Father is still for your protection. For the power of your will cannot be lessened without the intervention of God against it. And any limitation on your power is not the will of God. Therefore, look only to the power that God gave to save you, remembering that it is yours because it is his, and join with your brothers in his peace.
So I'm thinking I'm supposed to make sense of that sentence.
Well, what you experience when you deny your Father is still for your protection, for the power of your will cannot be lessened without the intervention of God against it. And any limitation on your power is not the will of God. And that's the way it's supposed to be read.
Yeah. So it is about let's back up here. First of all, talk about the idea of being homeless. We're not talking about houses and residences here. We're talking about an internal state experience of, are you at peace, at rest, safe, and at home within your own being? Or, as the ego would have you, to be homeless, lost, empty, disoriented, forgetful of the truth. That's homelessness. And homelessness is a limitation on your power to recognize the truth of what you are and what you have. So the ego fosters these counter narratives. And what we want to do is recognize them as counter narratives, so we don't mistakenly endorse them, listen to them, and try and identify with them. And so we have a counter narrative. Today's material is about a very strong counter narrative that we're building up to, that many of us have unconsciously endorsed without knowing it. And so, and the effects of that are, as it says, a sense of homelessness, of not belonging, a sense of powerlessness, all of which is opposed to the will of God for you, because any limitation on your power is not the will of God. Noel?
I stumbled on that sentence also. What you experience when you deny your father is still for your protection. Why? I know it's supposedly explained in the rest of the sentence, but I don't understand it.
Right now, it's not coming to me either, so I'm not going to pretend that I've got the, I guess you call it the spiritual reasoning or spiritual logic to put all that together. Well, maybe someone else, Sandra.
I think it may mean that God is our protector, not the ego. We think that the ego will protect us, and that's not true. God is our protector.
Mhm.
Holy Spirit is our protector.
Okay.
I'm mistaken by thinking that if I judge and condemn, that I'm protecting myself.
Right.
And that's the ego. I have to surrender to God's laws, not to the ego's laws. And that's where my protection comes from.
Yeah, no, I thank you, Sandra. I get it now. It's a false ego notion of protection. If I'm homeless and vulnerable, the ego wants to defend and protect, but that's a false notion. In the truth, we never lose God's protection, ever. So again, there's this true narrative: you are forever at home in the presence of God, forever protected. And there's this counter narrative that would say you got to go out and find protection somewhere. Defend yourself against your vulnerabilities.
So possibly the denial of my father being my protection is a red light to turn away from that.
Yes, you got it.
Re-embrace the power of God's within me.
Yes. Yes. It's a signal. If you pay attention to it, you'll recognize that this could not be true. Yes. Felicia?
Thank you. Thank you.
The only way I can say what I want to say is to go back in the past, because I know exactly what it feels like to deny my father. Okay, because I did that at a very young age. And I believe that he had denied me first. You know, I had that feeling. It was very strong inside me. And I carried that with me for a very long time. And then, but you know, my power was not lessened. I just thought it was, because I was in the ego, you know, and that limitation that I thought I had was not the will of God. And it took coming into the course and events happening in my life to bring me back, and that's what this course is all about. It's not learning, it's about undoing. I had to undo what I thought was real for me of that God had turned his back on me, and therefore I had turned my back on him, which I cannot do. And I just kind of wanted to share that, because that's what, it's the undoing of what I thought was true for me, and the knowing that I was never separated from God. It was just all in my mind.
Yes. Thank you, Felicia, for sharing that. I just saw one more thing in this, and there are multiple ways you can approach any of these statements here. What I'm seeing right now is it has to do with an expression of your will. When you deny your father, you are asserting your will. It may be terribly mistaken, but you are still saying, this is what I believe. And even that is for your protection, for the power of your will cannot be lessened. And it's nothing that would lessen the power of your will is of God. And so even when you deny God, at least your will is still engaged in stating what you believe. So we're going to leave that to rest and move on, because there's other topics here that have to be, that are easier to understand, that we need to address.
Your peace lies in its limitlessness. Limit the peace you share, and yourself must be unknown to you. Every altar to God is part of you, because the light he created is one with him. Would you cut off a brother from the light that is yours? You would not do so if you realize that you can darken only your own mind. As you bring him back, so will you return. That is the law of God for the protection of the wholeness of his son.
So this begins to deal with the central issue here in this ego counter narrative, to realize you can only darken your own mind, but you can think that it's due to what others have done. In truth, you can only, all attack is self-attack. You can only darken your own mind, but you can spend a lifetime of blaming others for it and believing that if they would change, then I would be better off. And so that's the counter narrative, is to mistakenly cut ourselves off from others and see them as a source of our grievance and our blame. A Course in Miracles asks that we accept responsibility for the contents of our own mind, for the exercise of our own will. And part of it is the recognition that our decisions and our choices are necessary for our own health and well-being. And so as you bring your brother back, you will return. You stop blaming anyone. Blame and grievances and judgment, no matter what direction they're pointed, are ways of making you feel homeless and lost and unattached. Sandra?
So I benefit greatly from seeing myself and my brothers as innocent.
Indeed. Indeed, that heals. That's what the essence of forgiveness. Okay, so here, all this has been in preparation for the next two slides. David?
Only you can deprive yourself of anything. Do not oppose this realization, for it is truly the beginning of the dawn of light. Remember also that the denial of this simple fact takes many forms, and these you must learn to recognize and to oppose steadfastly without exception. This is a crucial step in the reawakening. The beginning phases of this reversal are often quite painful, for as blame is withdrawn from without, there is a strong tendency to harbor it within. It is difficult at first to realize that this is exactly the same thing, for there is no distinction between within and without.
Mhm. And I would submit that this and the next slide are the central message here. So let's make sure we are directly aware of what we're dealing with. This is a crucial step in your awakening and the reawakening of anyone. This is a crucial step. What is it? Learning to recognize that it is your own mind limiting. You were given great power by God, but your own mind in the counter narrative is preoccupied with imposing limitations and depriving you of that power. So it's a sense of accepting once again responsibility. You were given the power of God and accepting responsibility for being a co-creator, using that power for good. So it comes in phases, and I want to go a little deeper here in understanding the forms that this can take, because as it says here, there are many forms that this denial can take. And I have listened to many students talk about one form or another. So the beginning phases of the thought reversal, which are not pleasant, has to do with believing external factors determine your reality. And it's a projection of guilt and blame externally. It's a denial of responsibility for yourself. They did this to me. I think Sandra talked about our original narrative, family narratives. Well, most people start out this way, not everyone perhaps, but most. Blame is a strong tendency to point outwards for the blame. But as you progress along this journey, it shifts to a tendency to put the blame inwards on yourself. This is a later phase in the journey. I can only tell you, I hear students talk about this quite a bit, is they realize now it's not out there that is the cause of their grief, but they mistakenly fell into this strong tendency to harbor blame within. And it's difficult to realize that this is the same thing as blaming without, but we know this now. Blame pointed in any direction is the same thing. Okay, so this is the beginning of a crucial step in the reawakening. Susie? You're muted.
I just wanted to point out, I love that the Course tells us that the beginning phases are quite painful. and that it's very difficult in the beginning. So this adds to what Kim and I were saying, like it's difficult in the beginning because it's very different, as it said last week. And so it takes time, and I love the fact that it says that it's the exact same thing, which is why everything comes down to forgiveness of what I think I did to myself and what I think my brother did to me. But more than that is just that it says it right there. I don't remember this. It's often quite painful and it's difficult. So that was helpful for me, and I just wanted to point that out.
I think the painful part, or at least this is an interpretation, the painful part is now to feel like you're to blame and to walk around with this self-defeating view. That can be quite painful.
Mhm.
If I can editorialize for a minute,
Sure.
not to disagree with Susie, but the interpretation I think is a little different, particularly based on what we read in the last lesson, which is the way is not hard, but it is very different. And what they're referring to, I think, here is the initial step is difficult to comprehend because it's not what we're used to thinking, and that's why it's difficult, but not that it's difficult.
Yeah, it's difficult to realize that these are the same thing, but the way is not difficult. So yes, it's a subtle distinction there on it's difficult for my mind to realize that I'm doing the same thing now to myself that I used to do to others. Noelle?
To follow up on what Susie said, the recognition that it can be painful to me is a recognition of the compassion, the gentleness, the acceptance that the Holy Spirit has for us, and the patience. Also, the difficulty for me is continuing to remember to turn, you've talked a lot about the right use of denial, to deny and then turn away and replace.
Yes.
For me, that also the deprivation I've learned comes to a deep sense of not deserving, not measuring up, not feeling or judging myself that I don't measure up. And, analytically, I'm sure it goes back to parental blah, blah, blah. Nevertheless, the recognition that only I can deprive myself again means choose differently.
Yes, thank you, Noelle. I love what Noelle said. It goes back to parental blah, blah, blah. All you guys know what we mean. Thank you. All right, lots of hands here. Kim.
So I'm really excited about the fact that because of this today, I have this complete awareness of, now I'm going to use worldly words now, not spiritual words, but how freaked out my ego must be with all of my healing, that this has been such an issue for me this week. And so now I see it as, wow, look how much I've grown and healed. And my ego's just going nuts. And so all week it's felt like this battle. It's felt like a battle, but I knew spiritually that it really wasn't, but I didn't know what to do with it. And now I almost have gratitude around it. So I'm just really excited about this today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's give Brian, recognize Brian.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'd be curious on your thoughts about the first sentence. Only you can deprive yourself of anything. And who is the you that is being addressed here? And my best guess is that it can only be the right mind, because everything else is illusion. Everything else doesn't exist. And there is nothing outside of the right mind. And so in that case, we fit in somewhere in the wrong mind, where we, every time we don't follow this, we reinforce the separation and redo the separation all over again. So I wonder if that's if that's how you see it as well, that the you there is the right mind and certainly not the ego mind. Not me, Brian.
Right.
Big mind.
Yeah. Well, I want to acknowledge you're asking the right question. We want to identify the you in all these sentences, because there are, as Brian pointed out, there's the you that's aligned with truth, and there's the you that's aligned with illusion. I take it the you that's aligned with truth realizes that the power of God is within you. Nothing can take that away from you. You are not limited by anything in this world, and therefore are not deprived of anything. The you that gets confused and forgets the truth, and believes in illusions, slips into littleness and limited and lack deprivation thinking, and believes that you are deprived of things and can't be helped. But that you is the mistaken you. That's the way I'm interpreting it here.
So right mind and wrong mind.
Yeah, so the right mind knows and is confident that God's power cannot be taken away from you by anything in the universe. The wrong mind forgets that and believes in the counter narrative, which is all about deprivation. And we're going to go into explore that a little bit deeper in the next slide.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Heather.
Yeah, this line, I really understand it for myself now. It says that the denial of the simple fact takes many forms. And so for me, I'm used to kind of the ego coming at me from, you're not good enough and blah, 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 blah. It's the flank attack for me is when I start owning my grandeur, then it really attacks me and goes into, what you're grandiose and, who you think you are. So it's the light part of me, not the darkness. And that trips me up because it came in a different form. I'm used to seeing it coming from the other side, but I'm not used to this side. And so it's been, for me this week, particularly painful too, because I'm being attacked on that side when I never saw it coming. It was just a flank attack that flattened me because I'm used to protecting from the other side, but not from our light, not our darkness. So that was been so powerful for me today.
Thank you, Heather. Actually, that's an excellent lead into what we wanted to talk about next. So if you still have your hand up, I'm going to ask you to be patient here for a moment. I want to take advantage of this moment to follow up with what Heather said. I was all enamored with this insight this morning and created this slide. So let's review the various ways in which we view our you. That go back to Brian, who is the you? And it has three forms. Two of them are ego-sponsored false forms. So the one which was the one Heather was just referring to, is the ego will inflate itself and think itself to be magnificent, better than others, full of pride and arrogance, point its fingers and blame at others, feel as though it's on top of the world and it has its own pseudo freedom, which is really a form of little self asserting itself. And then this needs to be healed clearly, because this is a homeless view of self that really lacks love, but pretends to be better than others. And that's healed by replacing the false self concept. But that view has another form, which is no better. It's the same thing, but it has different form. And that is the self-debasement form that views ourselves as less than others, unworthy. It's actually a defense for hating your false self. It can, in religious circles, appear as false humility. That is very timid and fearful. And the unfortunate byproduct of this is it's difficult for the will to function at all. This goes back to that sentence we were trying to understand. At least when you deny the Father, you're asserting your will. But in the self-debasement state, there's often paralysis of the will. It's a type of ego prison, and you'll recognize the concept can be but myself I crucify. Well, that's what we're talking about. And then that heals by restoring self-respect. Both of these are counter narratives of the ego, which are contrasted with the view we learn from the Holy Spirit in this course, which is the true self-concept. So, Brian, here's the real you. Here's the you that your right mind will begin to get a glimpse of and identify with, that I am as God created me. It has a sense of respect, not for yourself better than others, but for a respect for the gifts that God has given. And the blessings that come from that. And it's a recognition that I'm a part of a greater sonship that is where my true identity lies. It has a sense of dignity in being a happy learner, realizing your gifts. And with it is a true humility, because we are so blessed to have all these gifts from the Creator. We didn't go out there and work for it. They were given as gifts. So it brings about a true humility and a true sense of freedom. So, who is the real you? You can't ask that question enough during the day, especially when you're having those backlash. So someone called me about an hour ago who had the day before had like a spiritual breakthrough, insights for the first time, clearer than ever. And later on that day, their ego started doing what Heather was talking about, saying, who are you to think you're in the light? Who are you to be feeling God's gift and miracles? And so it was, so this happens. We want to question, in order to the proper use of denial, we want to question, who is this that's asking these questions, doubting who I am? And so this is deeply psychological. And I would say only the Holy Spirit can guide you to find your true self-concept. The philosophers and the psychologists that I have read in this world kept circling in this area. between self-afflation and self-debasement. They just got caught in an endless loop, but only the Holy Spirit can see the truth of who we are. All right, so please hold your comments until we finish this next paragraph, and then we'll open up the floor.
If your brothers are part of you and you blame them for your deprivation, you are blaming yourself. And you cannot blame yourself without blaming them. That is why blame must be undone, not seen elsewhere. Lay it to yourself, and you cannot know yourself, for only the ego blames at all. Self-blame is therefore ego identification, and as much an ego defense as blaming others. You cannot enter God's presence if you attack his son. When his son lifts his voice in praise of his creator, he will hear the voice for his father. Yet the creator cannot be praised without his son, for their glory is shared and they are glorified together.
So if you lay blame on yourself, you cannot know. So who is the true you? If the counter narrative we're talking about our own self-talk. If the counter narrative you're listening to lays blame on you, then you cannot know your true self. You cannot carry the counter narrative of the ego into God's presence. You can't be on the attack and enter into the peaceful state whereby your mind is fully accepting of the presence of God. It doesn't allow that state. It is not allow conflict to be brought in there. And so why are we talking about this? So that when it happens in your own mind, you say, oh yes, this is predictable. So for everybody, you can expect this will happen. Unless your ego is completely gone, you can expect that the ego will attempt to either blame others or redirect that blame onto yourself. That in itself is part of the counter narrative. It's where the choice comes in is whether or not you begin to believe in that counter narrative, or as Noel reminded us, you exercise your ability to use the proper use of denial, which is to say, oh no, I recognize what that is. That's the counter narrative of the ego, and I am not going to listen to it. I know that only the truth is true, and what is false is always false, and self-blame is central to ego identification. Sandra?
So my understanding of who the you is for me is my being. And I'm an energetic being. I'm not a body, which are the lessons that we're on. And so I have a frequency, and when I'm at home in my being, I'm at peace. When I'm not at home with my being, I lose my ability to accept what is, because I start judging and assessing everything. And the lesson that has been focused on is only I can crucify myself. By the same token, the lesson today is only my gratitude is what I can give to myself. Something like that. I'm not repeating it.
It can be but
My
by
gratitude.
gratitude I earn.
Right. So I can either crucify myself by the choices I make, because this is my being has free will. My being is basically neutral. And that's the you is basically neutral, and it has free will to choose whether I want to align with the ego or whether I want to align with Holy Spirit or with my creator. And it's much more pleasant when I align with my creator. I feel a lot better when I do that. And I know it when I'm not. And I'm grateful for that now as well, because now I can self-regulate. I can make that adjustment using God's will rather than the ego's. I'm complete.
Thank you. Felicia?
Sandra just said what I was going to say, only in better words. Because if I'm understanding this correctly, then so, and I can tell, like, anytime I have a judgment or anytime I have a bad thought towards someone, that takes me out of the presence of God. I can't enter his presence. But if I, like, say for instance, if I have an attack thought, and the minute I have it, I realize what I've just done,
Right.
It's in hindsight, of course, but so I asking for forgiveness, or do I say, oh, made a mistake, let it go, apologize if it's necessary, or if it was just all in my mind, if it was all completely in my wrong mind, but not verbalized, would I just say, like, I'm asking a question here, I guess, would I just say, like, I've made a mistake, I slipped over into the wrong mind, take me back to the right, thank you.
Yeah, yes. And that's what forgiveness is.
Yeah.
Oh, that was my mind that just decided the other person's a rat. But that can't be right. And now I know it. And I'm willing to change my mind and have it replaced with the truth. And the truth is the Holy Spirit recognizes that we are as God created us. That's what forgiveness is. It's
Right.
merely willingness to let go of your mistaken thoughts, judgments, and have them replaced.
Right. That has been a process for me.
Yes.
It's at least it's a process. And at first I did not even notice, and I'm come from not noticing at all to noticing the slightest thing. It gives me an uncomfortable feeling in my mind. And so I know that then it's like the Holy Spirit. I feel like the Holy Spirit's telling me, letting me know that you just messed up. And if it happens pretty instantaneous, then it's like, wow, good.
Yeah, we want it to happen instantly so that we don't prolong our grievances and blame. And since, Felicia, thank you for bringing that up. I want to repeat the half measures availeth nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So the half measure trap that I got into for years was my mind would label someone a rat. And then I'd realize, oh, that was nasty. That can't be right. And so I'd like kind of scold myself for judging them. And then I'd move on. Well, that isn't healing. That's forgiveness without correction. Special Principles of Miracle Workers, Chapter 2, is that first we recognize I made a mistake. I withdraw that. Correction is Holy Spirit. What is the truth about this person? So now you're replacing that person is a rat with sorry to use the word rat. That person is a rat. You're replacing it with the truth. That person is my brother. and is doing many of the same things that I would typically blame myself for. And that there are no, we are one in this, we're in this together. So correction must complement our willingness to let go of the mistaken thoughts. And yes, we need to learn this. The mind that that was taught to judge and to blame needs to learn this new algorithm whereby we spot our judgments, withdraw them, and allow them to be lovingly replaced by the light of the Holy Spirit's understanding. That's what the whole course is just mastering that process, and so that we can then move on to the higher stages of spirituality. Well, okay, so I've lost my place, David.
I don't think you have. I think this is no, did we do God hides nothing from his son? No, this is the last chapter.
Yeah, we're in the right.
Yeah, Christ is God. Christ is at God's altar, waiting to welcome his son. But come wholly without condemnation, for otherwise you will believe that the door is barred and you cannot enter. The door is not barred, and it is impossible that you cannot enter the place where God would have you be. But love yourself with the love of Christ, for so does your Father love you. You can refuse to enter, but you cannot bar the door that Christ holds open. Come unto me who holds it open for you. For while I live, it cannot be shut, and I live forever. God is my life and yours, and nothing is denied by God to his Son.
So this is really says a lot about, so we're talking about entering into the presence of God, which is God's altar, waiting to welcome you. The door is open. But what do you bring awareness of into that experience? Because if it's a false sense of you that brings a weapon of judgment with you, then you will be ineligible. You can't bring conflict with you. You will believe that the door is barred and that you cannot enter. You will this is a counter narrative. You will tell yourself you are unworthy of entering into such a peaceful place. And so all that is part of the illusion. If you bring the false self-concept with you, it won't feel comfortable, it won't feel welcome in the presence. And I want to jump ahead a bit now to the last step in the Course in Miracles, which is sometimes referred to as the last judgment. It's now we're ahead on the spiritual journey where 98% of your forgiveness work has been done. I'm making up these numbers. 98% of the world has been forgiving, and we're only holding back a little tiny bit. It's the last judgment that you'll ever make. And the difference between holding back that little tiny bit and not holding anything back, meaning blame and grievances and judgment, the last judgment will wait until it's all gone, until all condemnation, all judgment, all grievances are gone, and because you can't take a little judgment with you beyond the last judgment. You have to be completely free. And so here's the insight that I hope you will grasp. It will be you that deny yourself entrance into the presence for that last judgment. You will feel and believe, this is little you, counter narrative, that I'm not ready, I'm not worthy. So this has big implications because we're talking about your face-to-face, being face-to-face with God, about that opportunity to enter into the presence of God, the holy altar, and the feeling that you need to back away because you don't belong there. The last judgment is when you realize you belong. And there is no shadow, no doubt that this is who you are and you rightfully belong there. This is what you were created for, is to be in relationship and in love, have love given and received with your Creator. And there is no part of you that doubts the gifts that God has for you and your right to be there. Heather?
Yeah, I just got this piece that this is the last fear too, the fear of God.
It is.
That's why it's so fierce, and it's so blindsided me because I didn't see it coming at all. So that makes total sense. I'm just very grateful that it's being revealed.
Yeah, and it's very deep because you're so right, Heather. This is the fear of God. And it's very deep because it's not something that is talked about or understood by the philosophers or psychologists. So it gets buried in what you might call the collective darkness of humanity. And so it's never talked about. And so the Course says, well, let's look at that idea and see how flimsy it is, and discard, and if we're willing to look at it. Remember, we read earlier that this is the beginning. We're about to take a vital step, a crucial step in the reawakening, which is to bring these counter narratives out into the light. And so this points us towards the next section tomorrow, the dynamics of the ego. We're going to bring more of the ego's lies out into the light and see that, oh my goodness, they were all based on a bunch of fearful nonsense. None of them make sense whatsoever when we bring them out into the light. When they remain back in the dark, then they become algorithms or programs that our mind abides by, in the belief that that these things are true. Noel?
The last sentence here on the screen, to me, embodies perfectly the title of this section. Our inheritance, God is my life and yours, and nothing is denied by God to his Son. That's my inheritance.
Indeed. Nothing is denied. Only you, little you, can deprive yourself of anything. Don't, and that is the big lie, that you are deprived of anything. Nothing, in truth, nothing is denied to God's Son. Sandra?
My experience with this is I'm seeing a theme for me, and I relate to it because it's been a theme in my life of self-care and self-love, which I resisted and was so angry about, because I was programmed to think that that somebody else was supposed to take care of me. that I wasn't responsible for my own empathy, my, self-empathy, self-care, self-love. And I was so mad at God that this was going to be my path. And actually, that's how I enter into the kingdom, is through this self-care and self-love. And believe me, I had such a resistance, and self-forgiveness as well. I had a huge, huge resistance to that. I'm complete.
Mhm. Thank you. Okay, David?
At God's altar, Christ waits for the restoration of himself in you. God knows his son as wholly blameless as himself, and he is approached through the appreciation of his son. Christ waits for your acceptance of him as yourself and of his wholeness as yours. For Christ is the Son of God, who lives in his Creator and shines with his glory. Christ is the extension of the love and the loveliness of God, as perfect as his Creator and at peace with him.
So the ego would call what I'm about to say blasphemy. So in this encounter with God at the altar, you realize that you are one with the Christ light. That the image, now we're not talking history so much, people can relate this to 2,000 years ago. We're talking about an idea of a being that is seen as perfect and one in God's eyes. You are that being. And this is the truth that the entire ego scheme is intended to keep you from. And many forms of denial will be raised to distract you and redirect you away from the truth that the Christ within you. And what we'll be doing is dismantling those forms of denial. So, and the tragic psychological component of it is that in our confusion, we believe in the denial of the truth. We believe the counter narrative of the ego, accept it into our own mind, repeat the words, and blame is a major part of that. Deprivation and blame. So the last judgment is when we're no longer in denial of the truth of who we are and what we are, and of the gifts that God has given us. It's your acceptance of Christ as yourself and of his holiness as yours. I think it's actually very easy to understand. That the question, the words aren't complex. It's that there's part of our mind that doesn't accept that is, and Heather talked about it a moment ago. All of a sudden, she was feeling illuminated in her path, and the ego comes in and starts to question all that and berate her. So again, that will happen. You can expect it. And really what it is, it's a moment of truth, of deciding which voice are you going to believe in. Are you going to believe in the voice that would have you come closer to the presence of God without blame? Or are you going to listen to the voice and entertain the voice that would undermine all that? Damon?
Blessed is the Son of God, whose radiance is of his Father, and whose glory he wills to share, as his Father shares it with him. There is no condemnation in the Son, for there is no condemnation in the Father. Sharing the perfect love of the Father, the Son must share what belongs to him, for otherwise he will not know the Father or the Son. Peace be unto you who rest in God, and in whom the whole sonship rests.
So I'm going to do something that we don't often do. The next paragraph is in the next section. So this is a look ahead of what's to come, but it's based upon the foundation that was been built already in this chapter. So that's really, we break these up into sessions, but there's, in actuality, it's a continuity. And these are just stop points along the way. They're all interconnected. So I just want to spend a moment looking ahead at the next paragraph so that it prepares you in your acceptance of your part in this journey, and that we have this guide to help us appreciate our inheritance and to dismantle the counter narratives that have become so popularized in our world. So this is first paragraph, next section.
No one can escape from illusions unless he looks at them, for not looking is the way they are protected. There is no need to shrink from illusions, for they cannot be dangerous. We are ready to look more closely at the ego's thought system, because together we have the lamp that will dispel it. And since you realize you do not want it, you must be ready. Let us be very calm in doing this, for we are merely looking honestly for truth. The dynamics of the ego will be our lesson for a while, for we must look first at this to see beyond it, since you have made it real. We will undo this error quietly together and then look beyond it to truth.
Mm-hmm. So this is actually a marvelous opportunity to escape from the ancient prison of the ego, the chains of time, the psychological defense mechanisms of fear and the fear of God. This is an opportunity to escape from illusions, but know that others have tried to do so without guidance, and they wound up getting lost in the labyrinth, better words, the maze of the mind and the ego and the fears. And who is to blame? Where is the fear? They got lost in all that. It says here, and I believe this to be like another phase of the textbook. We are ready now to look more closely at the ego's thought system. We've established how it works and where the light is to be found, what the truth of our inheritance is. And so now we're going to go to a place that otherwise we would not be prepared for. We're going to go to a place where we take some of the cruel lies of the ego and bring them out with holding the lamp of the Holy Spirit out to look at them so that we can dispel them. Because we've realized already that we don't want to remain in that thought system. And we can do this calmly because our purpose is to honestly look at it for truth. And so the dynamics of the ego is the next section. And all this, just to frame it, is not to remain there looking at the darkness and the lies of the ego for years and years and years, but to understand what its tricks are, its delaying maneuvers and detours are, so that then we can go beyond it and realize that there's nothing whatsoever that the ego offers that I would want. For the gifts that Holy Spirit offers far surpass anything, any images or illusions that the ego could ever suggest. Heather?
This is such a comfort because I just see the Holy Spirit's gentleness. And it reminds me of when a parent, helps a kid look under the bed at the boogeyman. And it just so lovingly says, let's look together very calmly. There's nothing there. And she's there with us the whole entire time. And then she says, we will undo this air quietly together and look beyond it to the truth. So I'm just so grateful that I can trust the Holy Spirit to help me look at those things that are like the boogeyman under the bed for me that I can't face alone, and know that they'll be dispelled with her help and that I don't have to do this alone.
Indeed. Thank you. Kim?
I love that. And I love what Sandra shared about self-care. This lesson today, or this work that we've done today here, has been transformational for me, because this is exactly what has been happening to me this week. And so I just wanted to share that for me, it started with a big step that I took in self-care. And so understanding how the ego thought system works here is now allowing me to kind of rest in it, put it to bed, let it go, and not try to figure the rest of it out. So I'm just so grateful, Jonica. Thank you so much.
Yeah, what Kim just said, this is exactly what was happening in my week. It's a witness that we're being guided in ways that we don't fully comprehend. But the lesson that we are confronted with in any given week is the lesson that we need at that time. Felicia?
Hi, what comes up for me is this paragraph really makes me think of the 12-step program. First you admit you have a problem, you have an issue, you're living in the ego. Of course, it's like on steroids, because we're one step further than just the 12-step program. But then step 2 would be, we have the Holy Spirit to look to guide us through it. And then step 3, we give our lives wholly over to the God of our understanding, or Holy Spirit, whatever way you want to look at it. And then you make a list of your wrongs, and unfortunately, I was in a 12-step program, still am, but I skipped step 2 and 3, and then tried to do the step 4, which this paragraph talks to me of, like this 4th step. And it's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to think about things that you have done that, you have shame over, or wish you could go back and change without guidance. And so luckily I went back and did steps 2 and 3, and then redid it, and it was a whole different process then. And so I'm so grateful to the course to get me to that point. And so that's just kind of what it brought up for me. And for anybody that's familiar with the 12-step program, I thought maybe that might help them too. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Brian? We're having an audio issue. Try to unmute you there. All right. I think, why don't you work on that, Brian, and we'll come back. Noel. Oh, there you go.
Sorry, I think you unmuted me and I did at the same time.
Sorry.
Canceling each other out. I think the last paragraph of the slide you just had up kind of makes the point that I was trying to make before, but not very well. And that is that it says the difficulty with the ego is that we've made it real, and we have to see beyond it because we have made the ego real. And I was thinking that even in terms of your relating the story of example, I should say, of calling someone a rat and saying, well, that was an unloving thought. It was. But the core error, seems to me, is making the ego, making the illusion real.
Yes.
Because the slide before that says, as the Course says over and over again, God has only one son. Brian is an ego, is an illusion, part of the illusion. And Brian is not the son. The son is that right mind that we are trying to join with at all times.
Right.
And so the core error always seems to be is making the illusion real. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Actually, that's a really big insight, because this is my interpretation. Those thoughts that are flashes of immediate knee-jerk reactions that maybe put blame on somebody, they will continue to come for quite some time, but you don't have to believe they're real. The error is when you double down on those thoughts and believe them to be real. That's the real hook, when the ego hooks you, when you buy into it. Not that the thought occurs. In fact, healing is the thought occurs and we immediately recognize, oh, that's just more of the counter narrative, and I let it go. And so, so that's a really helpful insight, Brian, about making it real is what that's the real illusion. Noel?
Back to the statement that the Course is not difficult. We've said it many times, but it impresses me once again. It takes constant vigilance. I need to have it to keep recognizing my ego thoughts and choosing again. This on the screen, we will undo this error quietly together and then look beyond it to the truth. Also says it not to force it, not to berate myself for the wrong choice, but quietly, moment by moment, one mental foot in front of the other.
Mm-hmm.
That's how to do it for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. I want to, I know we're at the end of our time, just another moment here about this. What is difficult? It is difficult to distinguish that blame directed outside is the same thing as blame directed inside. It's difficult for you or I to recognize that that's the same. They seem, well, who is guilty? Are they guilty or am I guilty? Without recognizing that's the same dynamic there. So it's difficult to distinguish that truth that both of them are the blame game. The path, it's not saying the path is difficult, the path of reawakening is difficult, but that distinction that both even though they have a different form, who's the rat? Are they the rat or am I the rat? Seems to have a different form. It's the same thing. Ratology. Susie?
I put my hand down.
Okay, all right. We're running over time, so I want to thank you all for that. Wow, so this, Kim said, wow, this is big work we're doing here. It really is. This is the beginning, a crucial step in our reawakening to recognize these dynamics of the ego, so-called, these counter narratives. And we're not done, but we're willing to honestly look at the truth. And none of those counter narratives hold up when we take the lamp of the Holy Spirit in our hands and look at them. So I'll look forward to us doing that together and again in the future. Thank you for great work there. Feel good about your stepping forward and courage and letting go of all those counter narratives. Feel good about you doing that work. I honor the divinity within you. Namaste.
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 Bye. Love you all.
Thank
Thank you, Janica, everyone.
Love.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you for sharing, Felicia.